Man himself is the pursuit. Man himself is the pursuit of excellence. Man himself is the pursuit of perfection. Man is the pursuit itself. Hearing point-blank reality discussed gives many people a headache, causes some to become confused, and makes others leave the room. If you call thinking what everybody else calls thinking, then you're one of them. Time as stood up by an ideal weight chart. The past is far too short for its assumed importance. Glad we have some actuarial tables here, along with our friend a chair. Now for some athletic highlights and definitions. Civilization, the ultimate wimp sport. Or as some like to say, heroes come and go, but sissies are forever. A group of synapses in this one mental land had a certain belief regarding departing thoughts and their possible reincarnation, so that during interment ceremonies they would gather around the gravesite and chant, "Feed the dead just before they die, and they may not come back as you or I." P.S. Don't waste your time putting groceries in a wet bag, for decent, God-fearing, law-abiding ideas will have absolutely no interest in hearing about this. One neural knight told his family, "I'm going away," then went far away. Bathroom functions as related to fame and public renown. To be taken seriously in the city, you must either let out more than you take in, or vice versa. One man started his own personal form of continuing Lent, and the first thing he permanently gave up was mind reading. He said it wasn't all that hard to do since he'd lost interest in it anyway. How what is so is always true in your neighborhood, if that's the only place you live. Those who believe that man's best is behind him are correct. There is a place in the universe where every book title comes from. A park bench said to a passing cloud, "Listening to people reminisce is about like hearing an unedited symphony of elephant farts." The speaker's topic was religion and linguistics, which he covered in a single sentence: man worships words, not gods. The Aggrieved Man's Journey, a poem. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one that splashed mud on my pants. As per law number C5027J, in this one kingdom it is now permissible to quote others or refer to their work and research only for the purpose of sticking your finger in the eye of the past. A more conscious man can swallow anything. And note, this has nothing to do with gullibility. The coat of arms of one knightly family bore this inscription: "I resist not myself, so's to more fully live." Historical footnote: certain dense clans have subsequently attempted to use this banner as justification for their own unheroic self-indulgence. Technological addendum: the striking thing about the stupid is that they can make anything work. Expansion of a recent definition. If writing is the comparison of one word to another, and thinking the connecting of one idea to another, then is not civilization itself the attempt to compare everything perceivable and decide whether they should be connected or not? A viewer writes to say that he believes he's recently heard life itself telling him to shut up, and he wants to know if he had anything to do with this. And now for another episode of, well, I guess that takes care of that. If ordinary thinking could ever explain and understand the nature of the mind, then all conspiratorial theories wouldn't simply be yet another conspiracy. Some entertainment, if not entertaining, news from the fascinating world of city ballrooms. The dumb like to dance together. Whenever the regular king was drunk or otherwise distracted, the alternative ruler would run about exclaiming, "Free yourselves, good people. We have nothing to lose but our chains of delusion," in reply to which some used that he didn't even have that much at risk. Papa, why are there times when allegories make me want to jump up and down and scream? Son, that's because there's still a whole lot of mental human in you. A certain man with a deep personal interest in certain aspects of nature one day gazed out upon his back lawn and reflected, "If birds can bathe in dirt and hippos in mud, then why cannot I be allowed to roll about in the luxury of my own sweet mind?" And don't forget, you engineering students, that the dumb can always make anything work. Do let us give all its due. One useful aspect of being serious is that it helps prepare you for being dead. A more conscious man is never on a mission. In his study of the relationship between the brain and thoughts, one fellow says he pictures it as shoes telling feet, "Hey, we can wear out before you can," and feet replying, "Don't you bet on it." Another way of looking at memory is that there is nothing worth remembering. Today's travel tip, also known as, "You can't get away, no you can't get away." A critic is always at least two legs of the dance team under scrutiny. When Rex the Wonder Horse found himself in another kingdom where no one else could count, he thought to himself, "Why would any gargantua want to be king of the Lilliputians? And how can a real man's mind settle for merely thinking?" Today's financial news. When the potential investors learned that the central canon of the proposed new religion was to be music, beer, and sexy companionship, the talks collapsed. One guy told his everyday mind, "Hey, don't worry about it. If you ever do start understanding what I'm talking about, I'll just abandon it and move on to something new." A monograph regarding the nature of reality and human attempts to thereto portray. One man says, "Screw mathematical models, I want to actually see the things themselves." And, one of you might ask, should that include such as this? And, I might reply, it bloody well should. The all-encompassing comfort of silence. The importance of momentum in mundane mental affairs. The dumb seldom slow down, least they realize how dumb they are. Egyptology re-gypped, or how the lower Nile feeds the upper. "Daddy," asked the lad, "when cats die, do they come back as birds?" "No, darling, cats do not die." "Ms. Wainwright, should I file this one under hormonal disturbances or what?" More history. Ancient people drew funny lines and built weird stuff just so later people would say, "What the hell is this?" While the above would most likely be taken as archaeological history, it can also be viewed as man's intellectual one as well. Academic addendum. The longest man who ever lived still didn't live long enough. And on your way out, don't forget, if you're not laughing at history, history is laughing at you. Show and tell is always fun, isn't it? The subtle, unseen reality behind certain words. Humble, being crafty. The way things evolved on this one world was that the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning. Permit me to be sure I'm making this sufficiently plain. These beings were to use the intellect only in matters pertaining to the future and never in regard to the past. A city lad asked his dad, "Are the uncivilized happier than we are?" And his old man, by way of suitable reply, simply pointed out the obvious as it applied to the question of timing and of them being able to even discuss such matters. Now, you know, in other words, it was too some more showbiz buzz. Those who need an introduction to their act always have less than a satisfying conclusion thereto. Definition: I, the world's longest preface. Ha! Longest, try unremitting. Down, Rex. Down, boy. Well, somebody had already used Little Elvis, so I had named mine Rex, the Wonder Horse. Yet another way to look at and compare the two. Thinking, comparing one thought to another. Consciousness, comparing thinking with what is additionally possible. And the great civilian trade-ins continue. In the village square, a public announcement was nailed to the head of a young guard that said, "Kids, turn in your war toys for a mind." While such activities bode well for the collective future of the people, their king, totally unbeknownst to them, continues to carry around a G.I. Joe in his shorts. The way things evolved on this one world was that the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning. And permit me to tell you that these beings were known always and continually by the name of the younger generation. Hold on, that's not through yet. To bear up under the strain, the ordinary mind must remain forever uncreative and docile as a lamb. Some orientation points not found on compasses mundane. The mainstream dislike mutants. Daddy, is that literal and physical or allegorical and psychological? Yes, son, count them. 4. 4 answers in one. Down, right. Our civilian quote of the day, says one guy, as a matter of fact, a local artiste of some renown, says he. The downside of plagiarism is that you're constantly having to sweat new material. Once you realize that civilization is not organically the same as man's physical life, you can ease up on it. The way things evolved on this one world was that the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning the future. And as some of you already know, these particular beings were known by the name of the younger generation. But something you may not yet know is that during the intimate life of our galaxy, more than one expedition has set off from other planets in an attempt to eventually land on the area known as the younger generation. With the rise of the sun each morning, one father would leap from the treehouse in his basement and shout, "Hey, hey, another day, another chance to explain it away." A knight who ponders odds, weighs options, and otherwise acknowledges potential outcomes has nothing to fear, since he is nothing but a stay-at-home crusader. One man says that collective intelligence is like a good friend who will laugh with you through the good times and lie to you through the bad. For what more, Theodore, can we ask? One guy's snoticism for the day. Quoting, "What most people think ain't worth the brains they're thought with." Does anybody have a literary dictionary? Did you look up snoticism and actually... If hormones and neurons could speak in a similar style, one of their conversations might go something like this. Neurons say, "The absolutely most important thing for a man to do is to live a serious life," and hormones would reply, "Get serious." One guy's suspicion is that one way you might be able to spot a more conscious man would be that he talks about stuff rather than people. Why this sort of stuff seems so sneaky. Would shipping lines ever direct their captains to tell passengers that swimming might actually get them there faster? A curious corner of life. Those who expose certain mystical bunk fear that what they expose might actually be true. One guy told that splinter faction known as his son this: "If seeing the seriously dumb, or even, I might add, the dumb acting seriously, doesn't sometimes make you smile, I'm afraid you still don't have the full hang of it." The difference between thinking about something and understanding something is the difference between everything in existence. That's what makes this such a challenge and so much fun. An item regarding certain matters of romance. One guy's approach to dealing with the many varied and oftentimes conflicting facets of man's mental world was to simply call everybody darling. Yes, I said romance, and I'll stick to it. Being postmodernly conscious is in not replying to your own thoughts. Why this sort of stuff is never as popular as, say, hot oil wrestling with alligators. By the time you've managed to let all of the air out of an imaginary balloon, who's got the interest left to hear the damn thing criticized? Thanks in part to our home study course, one viewer says he's come up with this new approach. He says that whenever the past calls him up, he simply pisses in the phone. Another notice of this stuff, slipperiness. In the struggle between long ideas and short ideas, the short ones continually to regularly prevail, only to become long ones themselves. And now, an add-on to a certain previously noted unpleasantry. Not only is anyone who can make you mad smarter than you are, but anything as well. That's right, Power Rangers. How does that make you feel? Outfoxed now by inanimate objects. Jeez. And a viewer writes, "Are you aware that sometimes you have almost as many headings and titles for the items you read as you do the items themselves?" Jeez. Oh, I'm sorry. That second part should have been listed as Smart-ass pushy viewer writes irrelevant letter. In his desire to increase the stakes and to raise the level of the warring field, one night, suddenly and unexpectedly, challenged the armies of both hormones and neurons, privately proclaiming his intention to beat his swords into metal condoms. And one man made a solemn agreement with his son. If I ever ask you how you feel about a particular thing, and you tell me, I'll kill you. And one kid so advised his own kid brother. Well, I guess if you just gotta think, at least only think about the future. When genes, the stars, the past of man begin to speak, none but the truly heroic can turn their ear away. Okay, said the quiz master. The answer is few and far between. Now, what is the question? And contestant number 1 said he didn't even want to think about that. The real future exists only for those really conscious. How about a new approach, all right? The ones you picked out, why don't you go ahead and read them all through again and then see what happens. Okay, good. Hey, I like that. The way things evolved on this one world was that the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning. And permit me to tell you that these beings were known always and continually by the name of the younger generation. And also I wanted to make it sufficiently plain as part of knowing that these beings were given the use of the intellect only to use in matters pertaining to the future and never in regard to the past. To bear up under the strain, the ordinary mind must remain forever uncreative and docile as a lamb. Civilian quote of the day, one guy says, a local artiste of some renown, says the guy, the downside of plagiarism is that you're constantly having to sweat new material. Maybe I'm just speaking for me, but I'm awfully tempted just to read that one over and over for the next 30 minutes. Until some of you finally submit and go, ah! One guy's approach to dealing with the many varied and oftentimes conflicting facets of man's mental world was to simply call everybody darling. Right. Yeah. Didn't pull them all out, but if any of you were noticing, I know it gets to be so many, but there was, amongst other sub-motifs, sub-melodies, counter-melodies, having to do, as oftentimes the case, between a father talking to his son, whatever the hell allegorically that might mean. And may I suggest to you that these might be connected. Being postmodernly conscious is in not replying to your own thoughts. With the rise of the sun, each morning one father would leap from the treehouse in his basement and shout, "Hey, hey, another day, another chance to explain it away." In his desire to increase the stakes and raise the level of the battlefield, one night suddenly and unexpectedly took on the armies of both hormones and neurons, privately proclaiming to himself the intention to beat my swords into metal condoms. Assuming that you, through some stretch, you can see that there might be somewhere a connection between condoms and being a parent, having children. That's fun. Why don't I just reread the whole, every damn one of them over? Well, here's something on the back. You don't hear that. The way things evolved on this one world was that the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning. There were, if I recall correctly, 3 or 4 versions of that tonight that continued to have add-ons and become more and more complicated, or at least become longer. But they all started out with that there is this world wherein creatures that were given the ability to think were given this talent for one reason, for the purpose of planning. Now, seeing as how, if I remember, someone told me that this was the first time in which John Calvin got circumcised, and we could look at it as being at least a minor holiday, and I won't go into that. I won't even try to reveal why they refer to it as a minor holiday. If any of you who question that, you'll have to take that up with the National Bureau of Standards and Weights. Aren't they the ones that name our holidays? Although this was not listed as a legend or a myth when it says the way things evolved on one world, even after that, if you were ordinary and just tuned this in, you would assume it was a myth of some kind. All right? Someone has to be speaking allegorically, metaphorically, mythically. Heroes come and go, but sissies are forever. So, if it's a myth, then you don't really have to worry about it to start with. But consider, we have a planet, and the creatures there were given the ability to think. Right away, knowing as sharp as most viewers of television programs are, they would immediately probably latch on to this could be some kind of allegorical, perhaps oblique attempt to refer to us homo sit homians, as homo viewers. So it could be some sort of attempt to go around the block and refer to humans. Okay. But on this one world, it says the creatures were given the ability to think, but they were given that ability for one reason, for the purpose of planning. Consider what a, shall I say untenable? I don't think so, because I don't know what that means. What a unreasonable, I almost know that one, unreasonable confinement that would be. What if that was the only, what if, looking at yourself as a upright, God-fearing, law-abiding, educated, sophisticated citizen of the world, what if it turned out that the ability to think was limited to, that you were suddenly made aware of the fact that it could be enforced? But what if you were just told, forget the enforcement for the man, that you were simply informed, the ability to think, that very thing that separates you from bankers, beavers, the ability to think is for one reason. And before you jump to concussions, you do not know what the reason is. The reason is for one purpose, and that is for planning. Again, assume that you're a reasonable, middle-of-the-stream person, and you would think, wait a minute. And it was told to you through some voice for life, through some spokesman. It was given to you with a certain degree of weightiness, which I think we'd all agree. If you thought that life itself was speaking to you, you'd be, I assume, a little more inclined to give some heed to it than you would a guy on the street corner trying to get you to sign up to be a Jehovah's Witness or to buy a used Edstall. But if life said the purpose of thought, now that you have it, the purpose is for planning. That's all. That's the purpose, is for planning. And that's all you heard. Life didn't speak anymore. You didn't hear more about it. What sort of confinement? What sort of limitations? What kind of restrictions? What kind of, perhaps your feeling might be, of devolution would that be? Are you sure? Are you sure? Well, ordinary people would have to say they're sure. Well, let's skip all the bullshit. What if that was, what if somebody stood up and told you with a straight face that seemed to have an extra one with them and said, listen, if somebody said, I'm going to tell you a great mystical secret, I'm going to tell you something that's right at the heart of the so-called problem, quandary, conundrum, not metal condom, we'll get to that, of the life of man, and that is that thinking, the ability to think, was originally for one purpose, and that was for the purpose of planning. And we all thought about it. Using we in the kingly sense, that is, exempting myself. What drawbacks would that carry with it if it were true? That even if you just thought about it theoretically, the moment if you thought, well, if that were true, instead of an original sin of not obeying the gods or doing something in a behavioral sense, what if it was just ignoring one of the initial directions from creation that says, all right, you guys are different. Which if you could hear a voice, you'd be different already, because the beavers and the hippos are still just kind of skipping along, do. And if a voice says, hark, and you went, you're already different. Unless it was a bird went by and you had to say, hark, not halt. And they went, oh, okay, and they went on. But if a voice suddenly went hark or ho or whatever, and you stop, you've already, by your own behavior, you have singled yourself out. And the voice says, you are different. And you go, well, dig it. We can dig it. And the voice says, you can think. They say, got you. The purpose of thought is for planning. If we then jump from that, if we were taking that as an unknown mystical fact, a reality, and that was the original, or that was the basis of what is now seems to be the curse, that everybody believes that things are not going exactly right. And so that the original curse, or the basis of it, arose from the fact that thinking was supposed to be for the sole purpose of planning, and dare I say it, I believe that particular river has overflowed its banks. That people have taken upon themselves unilaterally, ex parte, to do other things with their mind than just plan. What if that was the basis of the curse? How could we ever back up? Does everybody follow? I said I was going to make it plain. Is that plain enough? What if the original intention, the sole intention of the human mind was to plan? Nothing fancy, nothing exotic, nothing esoteric, intended or hidden, but it was meant to plan. No other creature can plan. You can even take that as, or you can see that as being a giant gulp and swallow of all the archaeological, sociological, anthropological attempts to explain or to divide man from other creatures, besides planning and domesticating animals and having a thumb and a credit card. You could say that the thing is his ability to plan. Because we all know that you got fairy tales, you got so-called religious epics, all the way from grasshoppers to ants to Pancho Pilate and Crisco Kid, or Jesus, whichever one. That you have this thing that one of them seems to have no care for the morrow, as I think they say in fables. I don't know why they don't add the two. That they only live for now. Yeah, that's obvious. You should know. You can't find the best creatures you can find. They do not store up goods for the morrow. Dogs, cats, chimps, they find something to eat, they eat, and they walk off and leave it. That's the way it is. They don't go, wait a minute, you shouldn't walk off and leave that. What if tomorrow we don't find any food? Which may be true. And if they don't, they'll die. It's simple. only one creature can plan. Only one can do anything. Can plan, can go find a water hole and plan to go back to it on the basis that we may not find it. So wait a minute, let me draw a map, or let me tell somebody else. When I'm now headed back from whence I cometh, and I'll try and remember how I got here. It's all planning. But what if we limit it to that? If we took that as being a given, if that were the original, physical, literal purpose of being able to think was to plan, and if we look now, the human mind does more than that. If we extracted the product of thinking, which was not simply directed at planning, what would we have lost? What would we lose right this second? Would everyone like to think for a second and go, what in the hell is this about? Oh, come on. You can beat that. All right, we can always make it simple like this, back to one of, how about my good old line of time? Because here we are, there's the past, there's the future, the way it appears, and here at any particular time, as per your own nervous system, intellectually, is right here apparently is the present, just more or less. If you say, well, is right now the past? Well, no. Is right now the future? Well, no. Right now we're kind of in the present. If this whole thing, if the ability to sense time, if the ability to think, which is also synonymous with time in the sense we call it, refer to it, if this ability were originally intended just to apply over here, not here, and certainly not here, and right now it could be enforced. If we took away all the products that arose from man not limiting thinking to planning, what would we lose? Well, I'm going ahead and playing the part, see if I'm doing all this, hoping that you followed some of it. At first you might think, or be inclined to say, well, geez, we'd lose a hell of a lot of civilization. But then you should think, well, wait a minute, would we? Would we? Would we actually lose parts of civilization? Would we actually lose the artifacts, the technology, the architecture, the art, the physical manifestations of civilization, which civilization itself is simply, the way I normally refer to it, the observable, describable, perceivable outputs and products of man's intellect, collectively speaking. So you could, if we took away, if we extracted right now, if we could just wipe out for a moment all of the products of man's thinking which were not limited to planning, which planning by its own definition has got to be about the future. It's always about at least tomorrow. It's a planning. Simply, that's all I mean by it, is what you mean by it. Then if we extracted all the products of that which did not fit the definition of planning, what would we lose? I still suggest, speaking for you, that if anyone followed that and took it as being at least just an intellectual game for a moment, they might say, well, that would really, and they wouldn't know why, but I'm still suggesting they'd go, well, wait a minute, we'd lose a lot of just ordinary civilization, the fun things, the cultural aspects. Are you sure? May I suggest, by playing your part again, the part of everyman, John Q. Everyman. Don't ever move to anywhere USA on Main Street or you'll get his mail forever. Trust me. You can tell the post office, no, that's not my name anymore. I had a Jane, I'm now Jane Everyman. They'll still send you Joe's mail. Well, the post office, they'll show no interest in ideas of transsexuality. Moving on. Let me tell you the main thing we'd lose, in case you hadn't already done it to yourself. Forget aspects which I can drag it out. I could show you to where almost all of man's culture and art would, if not be wiped out, would be severely crippled. If we could suddenly take all of man's civilization and take away all of that which was a direct result of him not planning, that was not thinking about the future that brought this about, it would severely cripple civilization. But I had something a bit more tasty and dastardly in mind. Would you tell us what it is? Oh, come on. Okay. It would just about wipe out what is commonly known, at least in this part of the world, as a man's personality.
Yeah.
What is a man's personality? Well, I can think of two immediate ways to, you might say, artistically describe it. One is, it's a man standing in a field of shit, and the other one is a man relying on the past. A man using the intellect in ways, any possible way to avoid planning. Would anyone like to challenge that? Would anyone like to think, would anybody like to reflect upon the normal workings of your mind as it goes during everyday affairs? Taking that line, my little symbol of the sense of chronology, the sense of time, which is inherent in being intellectual and having the intellect fired up to the neocortex, you can't avoid it at that ordinary level. The personality, which is your normal workings of the mind, how often is it planning? Now, I'll grant you this, any of you, if you'd like to see how this kind of works and how it's tied to my other planet. Planning is by my own admission, I said I just meant in the widest possible use. But now to narrow it down just a little bit to try to get you to look in a certain way. I'm assuming that by my little pseudo-sarcastic statement I just made that some of you at least realize, whether you can see it for yourself, that I intended to point out to you that the ordinary workings of the mind very seldom, just through its normal workings, has anything to do with the future. So whether you can see that now or not, for the sake of our little theatrics, we'll assume that I am pointing out something that is valid. And yet, within the realm of planning, I could subclassify it, bring it down to a cruder level, more simplistic level. How about daydreams? And not just daydreams, but trust me, Matt, daydreams, and now let's move back just a bit to where you were a teenager, more or less. Since most people who will sit still and listen to this for any length of time, most people are beyond their teen years, somewhere approaching being grown up, middle class, and middle aged, even if you're only 21. If you notice, the great plans for the future, whatever they are, I don't give a damn what they are, that you're going to be a famous ballet dancer, painter, stock car racer, piece of livestock, I don't know. Whatever your dream was, if you will take note, not trying to give anyone the red ass, but if you'll take note, once you get past a certain age, once you get up that big old hill of horny teeny agedness, well, when you get up over that and you start sort of leveling off and go, the whole thing about, well, I guess my parents are right or somebody's right, I've got to settle down and get a job and I got to stop all this. Coincidentally, thanks to the great sisters of serendipity, take away their guitars before they sing folk music though, thanks to them, at about that same time that you get over that, your personality, as people would normally say it, it's nobody's fault when I say your parents, those around you, it's like, well, you can see it in other people. It's like, well, he's finally become somebody. Seems more apparent in men than women, there's no great importance there, but he's grown up, is what people normally say. And what they're saying is, you have just about given up all dreams of the future. Now, people they wouldn't like the sound of that, and they'd go, oh no, oh no. Oh yeah. Because that's about what it is. All I'm trying to get you to see is that this is not just an absolute of me saying that the human intellect is incapable of planning. But notice this, once you get past the age of being grown, sometimes it's very abrupt, and sometimes it's gradual, but abrupt in its gradualness, to realize, Jesus, I almost have no plans, period. But of course, then an ordinary person, if you point that out to them, remember the dumb, as I pointed out tonight, which is the ordinary, can make anything work. You can tell an ordinary man, are you aware of the fact that you no longer have any dreams about life? An ordinary man, if he knew what you were saying, could go, well, yeah, I finally wised up. They could take it as being a sign of a certain amount of sophistication. They might say, well, now I don't mean that I am absolutely blasé to the point that I expect to just lay down and die of ennui. But you're right about this. When I was younger, I had dreams like, boy, I'm going to be a great rock and roll player. You ever heard me try to play guitar? Yeah. I finally had to face up to it. I still enjoy music. I'll go to a concert, sometimes I think about getting out. But at any rate, you're right, I gave up some of those foolish dreams. You understand? But then, if you could get inside of a man's brain and squeeze it like a sweet pea and make him see it, he'd have to realize, wait a minute, I almost have no dreams. You're right, I gave up the foolish dreams. Well, I'll agree with him. Yeah, you gave up the foolish dreams, and what else did you give up besides those? You mean including everything? Yeah. I wish I hadn't put it that way. Let me reread it. The way things evolved on this one world was the ability to think that was given to some creatures was done so strictly for the purpose of planning. And permit me to tell you, to give you the name of those creatures. They were known by one name, the younger generation. And that's why I'm now pulling in. And the younger generation is of no importance, literally. That is, that the younger generation now or at some other time is not suddenly coming along and wipe out all the ills and the faux pas and etc., since there are none. But it is, let's assume that my line here, the present, let's assume that you have reached the high point of your hormonal career, that you're now grown. Pick out any age, it's now, you're in your 20s now, and you've reached this age. Now there's a younger generation. You might be 22 nowadays, the way things are moving, and to you may turn around. I'm sure it's possible now that there are people 22 years old or less, they'll turn around and look at 16-year-olds and go, God, what a bunch of punk ass, these kids are wild. They're using dope I never even heard of. Or they're using dope, even before noon. And, even at my wildest, I always waited until noon until I had a beer or something before I got on the heaviest. Younger generation is simply that which is down the far side of the hill, or the upper side of the hill from whence you just came. It's the ones right behind you. It's the ones that still have, I'm going to say daydreams. Now it will fit into planning. It'll fit into planning vis-a-vis, comparable, CF, compared to those who are now grown, and all they're doing is just coasting. They're sliding on that great greased boulevard aimed toward the fields of restful peace, eternal peace. Come home to mama. Once you quit planning, you're dead. Make it crude. But notice this. Everybody, if you don't know it, and you should, once you see it new, you'll be able to feel it. Those that kind of business pursuing this sort of thing. Everybody, that's part of being an adult. Turn on a TV or go out in public, turn on TV if nothing else, and look at presidents, prime ministers, experts in any field, and academics, whoever, a leading expert. And they call him in. Now, I can describe it all sorts of ways, but one thing about being not only grown, but especially being an expert is you no longer got any plans. Well, you can't. You wouldn't be an expert if you had any plans for the future. You're it. It is also synonymous, in the way I've been trying to intend it, for me to keep writing up the word serious. Serious is having no plans. A man cannot be serious if you can get him to admit he's got plans. If you suddenly jump down to a television studio where they're interviewing somebody important, the Secretary of the Treasury, and there he sits with his good $500 suits and the whole thing, and he's saying something. This seems to be an absolute response. It would seem to ordinary minds to be of importance. Well, what do you think is going to happen in the next, at least over the term of, let us say, the next 18 months to the prime interest rate? And he says, well, no. And if suddenly somebody jumped in there and slapped the guy around, if we get in the nervous system, and say, that's the kind of shit we hear all the time. Hadn't you thought about how to plan to do something for the future? I mean, what could we do differently? That's not the purpose of grown people. What do you mean do something differently? That's not the purpose of being an ordinary day's dancer. What do you mean do something differently? I had 15, 17, 20 years I had to do something differently. I didn't know what the hell to do. I almost went nuts. I'm surprised I didn't get put in jail or killed. I'm somebody. I got a degree. I got a phony baloney job here with the government. I'm secretary of so-and-so. Don't ask me about plans. I got no plans. I'm going to die. But until then, leave me alone, would you? I'm secretary of the treasury. I don't have... My good man, I don't have to have plans. May I give you another hint? Everything that's referred to as being great mystical experiences and awakening of consciousness, expansion of consciousness. You know what that is? Another way? It may sound simple tonight, but I am not misleading. It is an adult form of having plans. Because you might be able to, in some way, fool yourself with just all it shows is you're ordinary if after the night, if you cannot see that in one real sense, just be aware of how your mind just normally operates and always has been since you can't remember when. Teenage years is when I brought it up, which is not an absolute perfect comparison since there's no such thing anyway, but that's the closest. Since then, once you became grown, whenever it was you felt like you were grown, I'll leave it to you, it doesn't matter what age, that you suddenly realize, well, I was no longer that wild-ass kid I was. Okay. Since then, has your intellect been involved with planning? Some rearguard action, maybe, that tried to pass for planning, like, God, I'd like to get out of debt. I mean, I'm $4,000 in debt on that damn credit card. Now, you got to be just a routine coconut tree idiot to believe that that's planning. That's like self-improvement. I'm going to quit smoking. You can't call it self-improvement. Not if you got any sense. You cannot call planning, well, I'm going to try and pull myself back out of this, honey pit here. Those of you who don't know, that's before indoor plumbing. I'm going to pull myself out of this pit of shit. That will be self-improvement, and that will classify as planning. How can you call that planning that you're going to get yourself back up just, at ground zero? Yes, I'll quit drinking and smoking and cutting my wrist every morning, and I will get out of debt. I'll get out of debt, and I'll quit wrecking my car, and I'll quit, all of that. That is not planning. If you see the ordinary workings of the mind, it is a physical fact. It's not psychological. It is tied directly to hormones as always. Daddy, when cats die, do they come back as birds? No, darling, cats don't die. That was the end of it. I threw that in. The kid went. I was going to suggest that some of you could get a useful shock, whether you can do it right now or not, to realize that it has been, in many cases, 10, 15, 20 years, I don't want to make you feel any worse, that you've had what really constitutes a plan. Don't look as a remedial action as being a plan like, by God, I'm not going to go in debt any further on this credit card. If you call that a plan, that's like a possum saying, based upon the experience of my family, I don't think I'll cross that highway again. If you call that a plan, if you call that the use of the intellect, you can see there is a way. I'm still suggesting, and of course, as always, hoping to distract some of you, that the purpose of the intellect is to plan, and it continues to go on collectively. It goes on genetically. That's what cuts up what appears to be generation. It goes on without your individual participation, because in a sense you're an individual participant up until you were grown. It didn't mean anything, you were just swept along. And then it stopped and you didn't even notice it. You took it as being almost a survival, as a is a benchmark that you were getting older, wiser, and all it is, you quit having plans. It's like you just gave up. Now, it doesn't matter individually, and humanity does not give up collectively, because if you look, civilization itself appears to be supported by, run by, directed by the grown-ups, obviously. That the presidents, the prime ministers, the popes, the biggest well-known rabbis, everybody in the world, you're talking about usually 50, 60 years old, sometimes older. And so it's not that they are dead, but they're dead up here. That's how they're now the pillars of the community. That's how they are the foundations of civilization. Not teenagers, not people with plans, not people still intellectually alive. They don't make them president. They don't put them in charge of a university. They don't put them in charge of anything. They won't hardly let them have a beer, drive a car. You people are nuts. Boy, you untrustworthy. I know all that. You know, you're wild and all that. Yeah, but what are they really saying? You got too many plans. I tell you to go to school and do something, you go, not me. I'm gonna go join up in a band. I'm gonna run away. That girl down the street, that 13-year-old girl that just moved there with the blonde hair and the big beard. Hey, I'm running off with her. You're 15, you can't do that. Watch me. You just stop it. You go to your room. Well, I may go to my room, but I'm going to think about it. Non-stop. Nowadays, what do you think about non-stop at the ordinary level? For those of you who like geography, by the way, this is also known as Whineville. And each morning the father would leap from the treehouse in the basement at the rise of the sun and shout, "Hey, hey, another day, another chance to explain it away."